Welcome back, fellow football fanatics. This is College Football with Sam, and today we have Baldfather Bets on the channel. He's done a tremendous job in both college football and the NFL, but especially in college football at making picks against the spread, and he does a great job at analyzing the sport at a granular level and also at a national level. So we're bringing him on to talk about a variety of college football topics. I encourage you, if you have a favorite snack or a drink, to grab that, sit back, relax, and enjoy. And also remember to like the video, subscribe to the channel, comment your thoughts down below while you listen, and also check out Baldfather Bets on YouTube. Just search up his name, give his channel a subscribe, and also hit both of our notification bells. How are you doing today?
Doing well, man. Doing well. It was a good season last year. Been taking Since the Super Bowl ended, I took a couple weeks off and then got, right back into it. Really, this past week, started diving into a lot of the coaching changes, schemes that they run, what it's going to mean. Do the players that are on those teams like the new coaching style in terms of scheme that comes in, things like that.
That's incredible. I've been doing something similar with the Big Ten that we talked about a little bit pre-show. For those of you who are interested in early Big Ten previews or even some of my early coaching rankings, again, make sure to hit that notification bell. You're not going to want to miss the content that we release here on College Football with Sam. I want to start off the show kind of in a blunt way asking you about Texas, because Texas is your team, that you went to school there even, which is pretty incredible. I mean, not too many fans of their respective schools actually go to the university because it's harder to get into school than to, well, root for the team. So Texas went to the Cotton Bowl. They went to basically the Final Four of college football, and they played Ohio State very competitively but fell short. And after that game, it seems like they are losing a plethora of depth to the NFL. They have a pretty small incoming portal class, but they've also recruited at a high level and developed at a high level. What do you think Texas needs to do to stay on top? I know they didn't win the SEC, but they finished first in power ratings, and I think they were the best team in the SEC. They just ran into the beast of a head coach that's Kirby Smart twice.
Yeah. Okay. So, real, the first thing I just want to preface from the betting standpoint, because we've talked about this, I do my best to not let my preseason assumptions or future assumptions impact my week-to-week picks, because I feel like people, they get tied to their predictions early on, and then that can influence the way that they end up picking week to week. With that being said, obviously it's off season, and so I'm going through all that stuff right now. But like last year at Baldfather Bets, we were 863 and 682 in terms of our record. So, for an example, if your unit is $100 and you're averaging minus 10 juice, so you're betting $110 to win 100, that was a net profit of $11,280. So I really try to focus in on the week-to-week picks so that I can keep that profitability as high as possible. With that being said, to Texas and the outlook for the season, I'm gonna start off with saying this. You know how Georgia for a long time was right there, but they couldn't get over the hump, right? They kept being the second best team in college football at the end of the season. Michigan right there, but couldn't get over the hump. Kept being in either the second best or in that top three teams to end the season, and then got over it. Ohio State was right there. I think they were the second best team in 2023, and I think they were the second best team in the country in 2022. Gets over the hump and wins one with Ryan Day. Texas is that team right now alongside potentially Oregon. I know there's some argument for Notre Dame. I don't think they're quite there yet, but I think that Texas is that team. I think Texas was the second best team in the country last year. I think it was pretty evident. I mean, you're first and goal at the 1 yard line against the eventual national champs. Fourth quarter, 2 minutes left. That was the difference in that game. We'll never forgive Sark for running a sweep toss on second and goal, but that's neither here nor there. So from an overall culture, system standpoint, recruiting, all that, like it is there for Texas. They just have to make that last final step and win it. I think they're very player-led culture-wise, so the coaches are able to step back and actually coach. I think they're at that level now where head coach, coordinators, they don't have to get as deep into recruiting because the position coaches are the ones that are able to actually make those recruiting trips. They're tied in now, like Kenny Baker, defensive line coach. His area of recruiting is Georgia. I think for a few years now, Georgia has really dominated defensive line in terms of recruiting for the sport of college football. That state just produces it. And so they have all of their pieces in place. So the outlook for the program is very high. I think it will remain high as long as they have this system kind of working for recruiting, player development. Obviously, everyone knows Texas is able to offer the best NIL packages alongside with Oregon and A&M. They have the most money, so that's always going to be a big part. And now they're in the SEC. So there is literally, they check all the boxes from all the advantages that you need and everything set up in order to be successful. I think that as we head into this next season, I think we need to be cautiously optimistic with regards to Arch Manning. He's played very well when he's played. I think he is fantastic. I love the it factor that he brings. You can see it, especially like the touchdown against Texas A&M on the sidelines. And for people who aren't familiar with the Texas A&M rivalry, like what that means to a graduate of Texas to beat A&M in College Station, not let them score any offensive points, like the way that Texas won that game, it's everything. I said before the season I'd rather beat A&M in College Station than win the national championship. Like that's how big of a deal that rivalry was coming back. So for him to score that opening touchdown and then hit the all that stuff, he just has that it factor that you want to see. Feedback from all the coaches and everything is that he's the hardest worker in the room. He's the hardest worker in the weight room. He's first guy in, last guy out of the building. So I think you have to be cautiously optimistic when it comes to Arch Manning because the talent is all there. But when I say the cautious part, there's a thing that I think true Texas fans understand, but maybe the mass Texas fan base doesn't understand. Quinn Ewers was fantastic at Texas, and a lot of people like to hate on him because he didn't win the national championship. But you need to think about where Texas was when Quinn came in, and then where Texas is now that he's leaving. And like people like to say, the make fun of Sam Ehlinger for the Texas is back thing. Quinn is the quarterback that truly brought Texas back.
Yes,
and he had his ability in the short and medium passing game when it comes to precision throws is, again, it's underrated because you just take it for granted, right? Like when your quarterback makes an 8-yard pass and it's on the money, you don't notice it because you expect it to happen.
It's like J.J. McCarthy, for example.
Exactly. But when all of a sudden you're missing those 6-yard, 8-yard throws, you notice it really, really fast.
Yes.
So I expect that Arch is going to be more prolific in the downfield passing game. He likes the deep ball more. But if that comes at any sacrifice of the short and medium game, Texas fans will realize it quick because Sark loves running misdirections and then getting easy, quick, short yard throws. He loves screen passes. He loves all that stuff. If Arch can't hit those at the same completion rate that Quinn had, there will be some drop off there while also getting that increase that you have in the deep ball. Another thing that I think a lot of people don't realize, because in 2022 Texas had like Xavier Worthy, they had Jonathan Brooks, and they had A.D. Mitchell. Texas hit more explosive plays in 2023 than they did in 2022. And conceptually watching them, you're like, that doesn't make any sense. But then you go back and you look at the stats and it's true. And a lot of that was Quinn. A lot of that was Quinn. Quinn and Golden had a connection by the end of the year on the deep ball that was as good as anyone in the country outside of probably Howard and Smith. So I just want to caution Texas fans on the offense that while it would appear, and everyone thinks that Arch Manning's the next, coming of Jesus, it would appear that things are positive there. That doesn't mean that it's going to come without any sort of growing pains or any drop off from the way that the offense ran before. Now, just speaking to how it's going to run, you're replacing 4 out of 5 starters on the offensive line that has essentially had continuity for, I'd say, the better part of 3 years now. They've had to replace pieces, but for the better part of 3 years, you've had the same offensive line. With that, you're getting C.J. Baxter back. So for those who don't know, he was going to be the starting running back this year, had a preseason injury, had to miss the whole season, had to get surgery.
Yeah, it was really unfortunate.
Really unfortunate. He's a NFL first, second round type guy, the way Jonathan Brooks was. Probably not. I mean, Bijan Robinson was generational, but as good as Brooks for sure, if not better than Brooks. And then you have Arch, who has a ground game for sure. So I think you're going to see some of the running game take some of the pressure off the offensive line in the beginning as they get settled in. We're talking all 4 and 5 star recruits, all 300, 20 plus pounds. Like, these are, at this point, I think you give Kyle Flood the benefit of the doubt when it comes to
developed
developing.
by the best and they're high level recruits. So
exactly,
that pays dividends.
They will be good. So you just need to give them time to develop. And I think the running game with Arch in his legs gives them time to do that. Something that, especially after the oblique injury and the ankle injury, Quinn just had almost no mobility. So the offensive line truly had to hold up 100%, which that hurt him against Georgia. So I think that you're going to see them run a little bit differently. And then on the outside with regards to wide receiver as well, they have Wingo and they have DeAndre Moore coming back. Those guys, solid, check the box. Wingo could be very special. But outside of that, you don't have any returning people. I think I was surprised a little bit that they didn't get any of the wide receivers to come back. I wasn't surprised when Golden went to the NFL because he's going to get, I think he's going to get a first round. He's not a first round grade. I think he's going to get picked in the first round. I was a little surprised that Isaiah Bond didn't come back because preseason Isaiah Bond had first round, potential. He was getting mocked in the first round, and I don't think Isaiah Bond will be a first round pick. I thought if he had come back, he could have kind of solidified that first round pick. I think the coaching staff was a little bit not shocked, but I think they were a little bit surprised by it too. Then they didn't get either of their targets in the portal with wide receiver, right? They didn't get Singleton out of Georgia Tech, and then they didn't get Zachariah Branch after they lost Singleton.
Why would you go to Auburn over Texas? That doesn't make any sense.
From my understanding, is it was an NIL deal in Texas.
Of course.
Texas, while being one of the top NIL packages that they can offer, they do not break outside of, like, they have set values that they give for each position, and they do not go above it in order to get an individual person in. It's
that's very wise. And they probably prioritize trenches more than, like, let's say Auburn, for example.
The first NIL, when Sark came to Texas, the very first NIL package that he worked on with the university was the offensive line. So they do prioritize those things, and Auburn just offered more. And living in Alabama, that Auburn fan base is starved, so I understand why they did what they did. Then they went after Zachariah Branch. The feeling there was that they weren't willing to offer to his brother with regards, because his brother wasn't going to play in the secondary at Texas. Georgia, essentially, and I think it's going to end up backfiring on the Branch, but I don't think he's going to play at Georgia in the secondary either. But they offered him more of a chance, I guess, to the brother. So they missed on those two, so I think they have to get another wide receiver in the portal come spring. I think you'll see that. But cautious optimism is what I'm preaching with regards to the offense. It has the potential to be the best offense in the country. It also has the potential to make people realize that, man, they did kind of lose a lot of the top playmakers from the past season. And, hey, maybe Arch does need a full season to kind of get in. He also could come in and win the Heisman. So that's the trade that you have there. On defense, they're going to be nasty. They are going to be phenomenal. Like, they have an opportunity to be in that 2024 Ohio State, 2023 Michigan, 2022 Georgia caliber. They kept continuity across the top of the defensive staff. They did lose Blake Gideon in the secondaries, but They brought in Hudson, who's more of a man guy. And I think this is ultimately what they've been trying to get to, is they're trying to get to that top end defense where you can man up against some of the top widers, passing offenses, and you're able to shut them down. Then you're able to stop the run with just the linebacker or the defensive line and the linebacker core. And then they have guys across every facet of the defense. I know people are a little bit concerned about defensive line because of what they lose in terms of defensive tackle. That was the one position that they did hit hard in the portal, and they didn't bring in like guys from Group of Five or lower level. They brought in guys who were also at other Power Four programs who have had success and performed, and from a size standpoint, meet what it is that they're looking for.
Yeah, didn't they do what they did in like the 2024 preseason, where they brought in a bunch of like lower level power players, some of whom were rotational, but that's all that they want is depth and development. They panned out.
Exactly. They want 10 plus on the defensive line that at any point in time of the game they can rotate in and out so that they can stay fresh. That's exactly what they're looking for. The linebackers will be the best that they've been at Texas since, even probably better than the national championship team in 05 and 09 when they made it, or 11, no 09 when they made it. They're exceptional. Anthony Hill Jr. is probably the best linebacker in the country this upcoming year. So we'll see what they're able to do in terms of exotics on the blitzing side. That's one thing that PK and Johnny Nansen, that's not PK's foundation, but that is Johnny Nansen's foundation. And I think they finally have the defense now where they can start to get exotic with regards to the blitzes. That's what Georgia does better than anyone in the country. That's how Georgia beat Texas. With the sacks on Ewers, with the blitzes, the stops, the coming from. I mean, I sent you some, right? On the short little videos.
Yeah, those weird corner or safety blitzes where you just can't tell.
You can't tell what Spags does with Kansas City in the NFL so well. I think you're going to see more of that with Texas this year because they have the personnel to where they trust it, to where if it doesn't get home, they still can stop the big play on the back end. Like, it's not one of those situations where if it doesn't get home, then all of a sudden you've given up a touchdown on the back end. So defensively, I really expect them to be top 1-2 teams in the country, along with Penn State after they were able to get Knowles. And I will be in Columbus for the Ohio State Texas game. I'm really excited. Can't wait. It was my first time at the Shoe. I went to the Michigan game last year. That was my first time at the Big House. So it's really cool back to back to get to see such two historic, stadiums, historic fan bases, all that stuff. I'm really looking forward to see the defense go up against Ohio State and to really see what they do against Smith, because I think Smith will be out for blood because Texas was able to, contain him so well. And are they going to do the same triangle zone coverage that they ran against Smith in the Cotton Bowl, or are they going to be a little bit more aggressive and play man against him? Because, the pick that Howard threw in the second half, he was targeting Smith, and it was because they did the triangle zone coverage. So they had two people over Smith's here. They had two people over the top, and then they had someone sneaking up from the bottom, and that person sneaking up from the bottom made the pick.
Wasn't that Anthony Hill?
I think it was Benda.
Okay.
I think
it was Benda.
Yeah. I think it was Benda. Yeah. And so he snuck up from the backside and made the pick. So, are they going to run the same coverage against Smith? Because if they run the same coverage against Smith, I would expect Hartline to say, okay, this is what I'm going to do in order to try and, get him open. Or are they going to risk it a little bit and play more man? I'm of the opinion that no one in college football has the ability to guard Smith man to man. So if you are going to play him more man, it has to be a double bracket over him. But I'm really curious to see if that's what they do, or if they go with the triangle zone that worked in the previous year. But from what they're going to run, they're going to be 4 down linemen. They're going to be at two or three linebackers on the field at any time. They have flexibility with the nickel now. So Jelani McDonald, I think, will play a lot in that nickel spot because they can trust him on a run play to actually be able to blow up a block on a 300-pound guard coming over. And then on the back end, I think you're going to see a lot of what they did last year with the safeties. Getting Taft back was huge.
That
I
was
am
big.
the one concern that I truly have on. I'm not all that worried about losing Jade Barron. He was amazing, but they're pretty stocked at corner. But if you look at the scheme that they ran last year, Andrew Makuba was so valuable to that defense and what he did. I am a little bit concerned about that loss. And the other thing too, man, is he was a dog. He had that it factor. Like, he's one of the ones who got the defense going. Like, he played angry, he played violent. He was one of the heartbeats of them. I need to see what they're gonna do with regards to losing Makuba. But I mean, we're talking about first world problems here. Like, this should be one of the nastiest defenses in the country.
Yes, it should be one of the best up there with Penn State, who we'll talk about, and then nationally it should be a top 5 team, even with all they lose. And you know what? Bottom worst case scenario, like top 10 in the SEC is still like Sark has this program going, I think.
Yeah.
So you said you're going to the Horseshoe to watch Ohio State, Texas. I'm very excited for that game. That's a game that I'm going to be previewing easily more than a week before it begins, because it's one of the biggest matchups. And it's not just that, it's also a rematch of what was viewed by many, I would say even accurately, the de facto national championship game in the Cotton Bowl. So that's pretty cool. How do you think that game is going to go, just like from a brief early standpoint? And also tie in what you just told us about Texas into their 2025 expectations. Like, they're very talented, so of course they should be competing for a championship with their staff, but they're also losing a ton and breaking in a lot of new pieces. And then I know you mentioned the offensive line, the run game, which was anywhere from good at the best to an absolute disaster last year. Just tie all of that in, and what should Texas expect out of their 2025 team, especially in the biggest matchups?
Yeah. So let's start with the Ohio State game. I think the line movement, again, sorry, I always come back to the betting and the line, but the line movement's really telling here. So it came out 4.5 when the early line was announced, and it's down to 3. And every move has been alongside a coaching change. So Knowles was worth a full point, and then Chip Kelly was worth a half a point. I think the Chip Kelly loss is what it is. Not as worried about that for Ohio State.
Of course not.
You and I agree that the Ohio State offense operated better when Ryan Day was the offensive coordinator versus when Chip Kelly was the offensive coordinator.
You saw that in the playoffs, where Chip Kelly against Michigan was objectively insane, and then when Day's concepts were used in the playoffs, it's like, oh, this is what 2022 and 2021 was. It's just they have a defense now.
It's what you should have been doing the whole time. And this will go in a little bit when we talk about the national escape in Penn State. I said it to you, so I'll say it to everyone. Though I cannot overstate my respect for Jim Knowles enough. The analogy that I used to you earlier is, I think Jim Knowles as a defensive coordinator, a team getting him is as big as if a team got Kirby Smart as a head coach. I don't think there's any offensive coordinator in the country, including Steve Sarkisian or Lincoln Riley, that would be as big of a get for an offense to get as it is for a defense to get Jim Knowles. I think he's the best that exists. I don't think anyone's in the conversation with him. Like I said to you, the analogy I used is, I think it's a disrespect to Jim Knowles to mention Phil Parker in the same breath. He's that good. I'm very curious to see what Ohio State runs under Patricia, because Patricia likes in the best Patricia defenses in his days at the Patriots, he was 3 down linemen. He's 4 linebackers. His down linemen, they're used as essentially decoys. They eat up the blocks, and then his linebackers come and they make stops. That's why under those mid-2010 Patriot defenses, you had such high performing linebackers, because the system sets them up to really be successful. That's what he wants to do. I'm really curious to see, because that's very different from the way Knowles runs. When Knowles is last year was running the 4-2-5, he's really relying on his defensive linemen. They're not decoys. Like, they're not just eating up blocks. Like, they're there to make tackles. Because he wants to free up the linebackers and then free up Caleb Downs, because he had him essentially playing that hybrid safety linebacker role. I think from a talent standpoint, Ohio State. They're as good as they always are. I think Caleb Downs is the best player in college football. I think he will be a Hall of Fame player in the NFL as long as he doesn't get injured. He's as versatile as I've seen at that defensive back end position and at the linebacker position. So I'm really curious to see what does Patricia do on the defensive side, and then on the offensive side, what is Sark going to do to attack that? Because you can watch film, right, on Patricia's old defenses from the Patriots and when he filled in at the Eagles last year, which you and I talked about, I think was a little bit of a fluke. They were a dying defense and then tried to bring him in to say that doesn't work. So I do think Patricia clearly has talent on that end. But then what is Sark going to do to try and attack that? And in Arch Manning's first big road start, how are they going to protect him, give him some easy throws, give him some easy completions in order to let him kind of get into the game? And then how much are they going to utilize his legs early on? Because we've also talked about the college football season keeps getting bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. And one of the things that I liked about college was a little bit that was different from the NFL, is the NFL is a war of attrition. Oftentimes, a team that wins the Super Bowl at the end of the season is the best, but also the healthiest team. And college, now that we have the season getting longer and longer and longer, is starting to get into that realm. So if you have a quarterback who's an Arch Manning, how much are you going to let him run early in the season? Are you going to save things like that for later in the year? Howard ran a lot less at Ohio State this year, and I think that was intentional. Rourke at Indiana almost ran none, because I think that was intentional because they don't want these guys to get injured. So how much are they going to utilize Arch's legs in a very big game, but ultimately not a season-ending loss if they go up to Columbus and lose?
Exactly.
And then how much are they going to really stretch the field against the Ohio State defense? Arch loves the deep ball. The Ohio State defense is exceptional at defending against the deep ball because the back-end safeties are so good. I still think that Ohio State are going to be able to attack the corners a little bit next year. So how much will they do that? But whether it's Matt Patricia, whether it's Knowles, Ohio State's going to have a very good defense next year because these players are exceptional. So what is the game plan from Texas in order to attack it? And how does Patricia line up that defense in that first game? Because that's going to tell you a lot about what he wants to do going into the rest of the season. And how do the Ohio State players fit into that scheme? On the other end, Julian Sayin is 5-star, great film, and from what I've seen, and when they've been able to film Ohio State practices. But he's even more of an unknown than Arch is. Arch has had games where he started, he's played, we've seen him. We know the talent there. We know that it can be executed in a Power 4 college football setting. Sayin's first game is going to be against the Texas defense with continuity on the defensive staff. That's going to be tough. That's going to be tough. How mobile is he as well? We don't know the answer to that question. He could run some in high school, but he's more of a pocket passer. So how is he able to escape from pressures, from blitzes? And then the biggest question mark, I think, for Ohio State's offensive line. You look at the recruits that they brought in, it tailed off, I think, a little bit year after year. It got a little bit worse year after year. And then how are they going to be able to develop those recruits? Because Ohio State has non-negotiables on the outside. Tate and Smith Smith is all world. Tate is, all American. And I have no doubt that the other wide receivers who are going to fill in after they lost Ibuka, they're going to be fine.
Exactly.
They're going to be completely fine. They're going to be the best wide receiving core in the country probably again. I think they'll be fine at tight end. I even think they're going to be fine at running back after what they lost. I think they're going to be fine. So the question is how long does it take Sayan to settle in? Because I have no doubt that he's going to be very good. But how long does that take? Is it game one against Texas and you're like, oh wow, we have a Heisman Trophy contender here, or does he have some growing pains when he goes up against the Texas defense in his first start, and then an offensive line? What's the development there? How good will they be? Does it take time to develop the offensive line? Do they hold up against the Texas pass rush that did get them in the Cotton Bowl some, and returns essentially the pass rushers? Trey Moore, Colin Simmons, those guys are back. Hill is back. The people who are getting the sacks against it, they are back. So how do they hold up in the pass rush against Ohio State? And then obviously just the pageantry that will be the helmets of Texas and Ohio State. In Columbus, not a neutral site game, and that's what I love. I love that, and I love that they're coming to Austin the next year. One of the coolest things about being a Texas fan these past few years is we had Alabama at home. We went to Alabama. We went to Michigan. We're going to Ohio State. Ohio State's coming to Texas. Michigan's coming to Texas.
That's incredible.
I love it. I cannot express how disappointed I am in Nebraska and Tennessee canceling their home and home. I cannot express it enough. It is things like that is just so sad. It's just so sad. And yeah, I understand Matt Rhule canceling the spring game. I get that one. It's sad because Nebraska had the biggest spring game in the country, but I do understand it from a logistics, from a coaching standpoint, why you would make that move. But then canceling the home and home with Tennessee, it's just, and citing stadium renovations, like it's it's a very weak move. It's a very weak move.
Yes. Well, thank you for discussing Texas and providing all of your insights. I mean, I can say that I've learned a lot, and Texas is a team that I've been keeping my eyes on ever since they lost to Ohio State. I was shocked at how much they lost, if I'm being honest. Like, I knew they were going to lose a lot, but like you said, all the wide receivers leaving, the amount of the offensive line talent that's gone, and then on defense, they actually returned quite a bit, though. And I think with how they've recruited and developed there and the staff continuity. And I got to be honest, maybe you weren't surprised, but I was a little bit surprised at how ridiculously good the Texas defense was last year. Entering this year, they're going to be a mean, nasty, they're going to be an elite unit for sure.
Yeah, I was surprised at how good they were last year. I wasn't surprised that they were good, but I was surprised at by the end of the season truly how good they were, which is why I have that just confidence in them coming into this season. And then, like we said, on the offensive side, they lose a lot, but I think offensive line at Texas under Kyle Flood is a bit of a non-negotiable. Not as much as wide receiver is at Ohio State under Hartline, but maybe that next tier underneath. So I have confidence that that'll be fine. The question is how long does it take Arch to truly reach his full potential, and then do they have difference makers at wide receiver to fill in for some of the ones that they lost?
Yeah, and then very briefly, how many wins or what type of achievement do you think would make you comfortable with Texas in 2025?
I mean, I think you want to be 10-2 or better. The schedule lines up the first year schedule, and I think the SEC gave Texas a bit of an easier schedule when they came in. I do think they gave them a little bit of an easier schedule, but it was like, preseason saying how someone's schedule is going to play out is difficult. You don't know. You really don't know. So they had Texas play Florida last year. They had no idea that both Graham Mertz was going to get hurt, and then that was going to be the game that DJ Lagway missed. So Texas got to go up against Florida's third string QB. But I mean, I personally am very high on Florida coming into this next year. I said for a while, if they could get past next year without having to blow it up and fire everybody, they were going to be very good coming into this year. And DJ Lagway is everything that they say he is, and he's got that it factor too. So I mean, they got to go to Gainesville this year. they got to go to Athens this year, and they got to go to Columbus this year. So those are three of the toughest games that, someone's going to play. I'm sure Gainesville and Athens will be night games. They'll be, which those are very, very difficult environments. And then because of the tragedy that is Fox big noon kickoff, they'll get to play Ohio State during the day, which will help. That's an advantage. And real quick, one soapbox on the big noon kickoff. It isn't just that the biggest game in the Big Ten or in the Big 12 that day is being played at noon, which sucks. It is what it does for recruiting. So if you are the difficulty of making it to Columbus, Ohio, if you are a recruit from Minnesota and you played a Friday night football game the night before,
insane.
and then you have to make it to Columbus for a noon kickoff. So just to make it there in time is hard enough, but you're going to miss all the pregame stuff that they have set up for you for recruiting. That's difficult. The impossibility of if you are a kid in Fresno, California, and you're going to make it to Boulder, Colorado for a 10 a.m. kickoff, it's impossible. It is setting up the Big 12 and the Big 10 to not be able to utilize their biggest games in order to help their recruiting. So something has to be done about it. I get why Fox made the decision. If I was the brass at Fox, I'd have made a very similar decision. But the idea that they thought that they would lose out viewers in the evening window because they had to share it with another big game, that's not true. The reason that they're getting more viewers in the noon window is because, there isn't any other games on, so people tune into that game. But you would have more viewers for that game if you were playing it at 7 p.m. at night. I'm 100%,
Yes.
100% certain of it. So it's okay. That's my soapbox on big noon kickoff. But back to the Texas schedule. So those three road games are extremely difficult. So they have to play their toughest opponents this year on the road. They do get Texas A&M at home. So I think a 10-2 season should be the floor for what would be considered acceptable appearance in the college football playoff. And obviously the goal needs to be 11-1, 12-0, and an SEC championship, because that was what escaped them this past year was the SEC championship and then the national championship. But once you win the SEC championship, then you go from there. And I think this is potentially one of the last years where the conference championship games will truly be conference championship games and set up the way that they're set up. So try and go to Atlanta and win that game because you weren't able to do it the previous year.
I think that's a great goal for Texas entering 2025, and certainly they are among one of the few teams that I think has the depth and the coaching and just really the perfect mix to go on a college football playoff run and also have success in the regular season. I want to move on to the Big Ten, and then we'll come back down south. What is your view of the Big Ten in 2025 very broadly? Like, what are the best teams, some of the best programs, and give me a team or two who you think is going to rise and who's also going to fall.
Yeah. Love Ohio State. That goes without saying. Everyone who's followed me for a while now knows that I'm in a love affair with Ohio State. I think they've been the best program in the country since post-COVID, including Georgia. I think Ohio State's the best program in the country. I think my preseason number one, I have Penn State. I have Penn State as the number one team in the country entering the preseason. You look at the formula of what's won the national championship a lot in this post-COVID era. It's been what are you bringing back in terms of continuity, and then adding in very small pieces in the portal. And then I just said what I think of Jim Knowles. So I have Penn State as my preseason number one. That doesn't mean that I think they're going to win the national championship. I just would have them as my preseason number one. At the end of the day, James Franklin can still James Franklin all over himself. So that exists. I don't think they have as high of a ceiling as a Texas or Ohio State, but they should be preseason number one. I think you're going to get a better Nebraska this year. I think you're going to get a better Wisconsin this year. I think both of those teams are primed for success this year. Let's say it this way. If you don't get a better Wisconsin this year, then sadly, as much as I love Fickell, I think you got to do something else because it just would appear that then it's just not working. But hey, this is year 3 of Rhule. There seems to be a very proven formula with Matt Rhule in college football with regards to year 1, year 2, year 3, and they were exactly where he trends in year 1 and year 2 after taking over a program. So I think you're going to get a really good Nebraska. I have loved Jonathan Smith. I loved the hire last year when they brought him in. From my understanding, deep in that program, though, is not everyone on Michigan State is sold on Jonathan Smith. So they're not unlocking all the resources for him. So I'm very curious to see how they do, because if the donors aren't willing to put money into the program and they're not unlocking all the resources for him, then it was failed from day one, and they should just move on. If Smith is able to have a solid team this next year, then does that get the boosters and the fan base and everyone excited back behind him and then unlock a lot moving forward? But I think a lot of the people were really upset at him for boasting Chiles so much and then letting Levitt go to ASU, and then especially it didn't help that Levitt had such a great season for ASU, right? But I still believe that both Smith and Chiles together is a very lethal combo. I believe that the offensive line development under Smith is tops in the country, so I'm excited to see how Michigan State's offensive line
especially
performs.
since they got that All-American Montana State tackle Connor Moore that Ohio State wanted. That
exactly.
was a really good move.
Huge. So I think Michigan State quietly could be very good. And then you have Michigan, which is the real big question mark of how much improvement are you going to see this next year? Because no one ended the season hotter. No one ended the season with more momentum. I still have my questions about the coaching staff. I still do. I maintain that the Ohio State game was more about the lack of coaching execution from Ohio State than Michigan doing it. Michigan didn't play that good in that game. That's the thing that's so crazy about it. They didn't have that great of a game.
They turned it over in the red zone a bunch.
Exactly.
They couldn't. They had 68 yards passing and beat the national champion. It was hilarious.
Exactly. I think the Alabama game, it was a bowl game. The fact that a hurricane hit during the first quarter, I think, had a lot of impact on that game. And then Milroe, man. Milroe was so bad by the end of the year. Like, they had people open against Michigan, and he was just throwing into triple coverage. It was wild. So they got a lot of momentum. They won a lot of games, but how much of that was the team they played, failed versus how much of that was, okay, Michigan figured things out. I think Bryce Underwood is as good of a quarterback recruit that I've seen in years. I think he is completely anti what the Michigan system is and what they like to run. I think you could not have a worse marriage in terms of style of a quarterback and what Michigan likes to do. It may not matter because he's that good. It just may not matter. But when he flipped from LSU to Michigan, I was shocked in the sense of I got it from a money standpoint. That NIL deal is pretty sweet. But from a system standpoint that unlocks him to be successful, what LSU does, I mean, he fits that like a glove. Like, it is exactly the way Bryce Underwood wanted to play in high school, and the arm talent and how he likes to play. I mean, you couldn't have a worse fit in terms of style and player with Underwood in Michigan. But like, that may not matter. It may not matter because Underwood may truly be that good, and he can go from running a shotgun spread offense to running an under center, run the ball with only 25 to ish attempts a game passing and be completely fine because he's that good. So I think the biggest question mark and the most interesting story that I have for next year, and the one that I'm really, I could see it going either way, is Michigan. At the bottom of the conference, and we've talked about this a little bit, I still don't think the Big Ten is where they need to be. And the analogy I use to explain this is Mississippi State will always care more and spend more money on football than Purdue will, or Northwestern. You even see it with Vanderbilt, right? Like, Vanderbilt spent money on football. They renovated the stadium, and even if it took them a little bit too much time to get the renovation done, and they invested in all that stuff. You don't see, when I'm in Indiana or when I'm in Chicago or when I'm in Ohio, the teams at the bottom of the Big Ten that traditionally have not cared about football and have cared about basketball, people at the bar aren't talking about it. But if you walk into a bar in Mississippi and Mississippi State is 1-8, they're still talking about it. Everyone is still big on the program, and that's top to bottom in the SEC for every single team. Whereas in the Big Ten, the bottom tier teams, they still don't have that. I think the Big Ten has done a lot to incentivize those universities to spend money on football and to upgrade their facilities and to make sure that they're at the level that they need to be to be a part of the Big Ten for sure. But you can't make a fan base care about something that they don't traditionally care about.
Exactly.
That takes culture and that takes time. So I still think you're going to see a pretty big drop off. Whatever the bottom tier teams are in the Big Ten this next year, I think you're going to see a pretty big drop off. The other big question mark, and I think most interesting team alongside Michigan to follow this next year is Indiana, right? I mean, how could it not be? Like, what are they going to do for an encore? What are they going to do for year two? I don't think there's any way you could say that you don't trust the coaching staff, but they do have a lot to replace. And will the schedule work out the way that it worked out for them in this previous season?
What about USC?
Yeah, talked about this a little bit before we got on, right? One of the things that you have when you have coaching hires is people follow those coaching hires a lot in year one, and then year two comes along and it's like they kind of forget about it. I think USC with Lynn on defense has an opportunity to be much improved. I think you're going to see Riley be more comfortable with his quarterback this next year, just from what I could gather. But they lost a ton, man. And the direction of the program is not really in the way that it needs to go. And there are rumblings that they're, just like I talked about Michigan State, not being fully aligned on the back end behind the coaching staff and behind the program.
USC has not been aligned
Exactly.
at all.
They're not. They're all over the place. So unless they get early momentum, and so then they can kind of bring all that back in to get the momentum behind Riley and go to the program, you could have issues. And they don't play the easiest schedule either.
No.
But they're a big question mark. But I have a bit more faith in Lynn on that defensive side than I do in a lot of other, year two coaches, year one coaches who are coming in to try and fix something that was completely broken when they inherited it. And I didn't mention Oregon, but I did mention them in the beginning. I said Texas is that team that's right there that was just on the doorstep. And the other one that's in the same breath with them, or maybe just below them in terms of they've been right there, they just can't win the national championship, it's Oregon. So I have faith in more. I have faith in Lanning. What I don't have faith in, and I said it all year long last year, and some people were like, no, until it finally mattered. I said Oregon's defense wasn't good last year. I was like, this is a paper tiger. They've gotten lucky. They haven't, just things have gone their way. And then when it mattered most, obviously their defense got exposed. So do they fix that side of the ball heading into this next year? Because if they don't, they won't win the national championship. But if they do, they absolutely could win the national championship.
I think one of the biggest misses, since it was obvious that Knowles was open to leaving Ohio State, and I don't know like how much this would have, like, if it was even possible, but what would the storyline be if Oregon poached Knowles instead of Penn State?
That'd be wild.
Like that's the number one program moving forward, as long as he's there with Will Stein and how they recruit in that offense. That would be, I kind of think in my mind, I've thought about this more. It's like that may have been a missed opportunity where I know you want to keep around Lupoy because he runs your system and he's a good recruiter, but when you can get a DC that's that good and you have the money, like you take that 10 times out of 10.
Mm-hmm.
And as for USC, I think it's going to be the best USC defense in a while. I don't think they'll have the top end talent to be elite, but I think they'll be maybe almost like Iowa in a way, when they don't have like a Cooper DeJean or a Jack Campbell, where they're just very fundamentally sound. They're in a right position and they're very they're elite schematically, and that will help them out. Moving on to the SEC, or going back to the SEC, same thing as the Big Ten, best programs, best teams, any risers and fallers that you see in the SEC entering 2025?
Yeah, for sure. Best programs, Texas and Georgia. I think they're your non-negotiables there. People who are saying that, oh, Georgia's fallen off. We'll see. we'll see. We'll see if Georgia's fallen off. I think a lot of people forget that they played the game against Notre Dame with a backup quarterback, and that they had 17 points scored on them in, I think, like less than 60 seconds. So that's a big impact there. We'll see how much Georgia's fallen off as they come into this next year. Texas spent enough time on Texas. Risers. Like I said, I'm in love with Florida. A little bit too much. Scares me how much I love Florida coming into this next.
How much? Top 10, top 15, top 20?
I think they could be a top 10 program in the country. Like, I think
wow.
I think they have that potential. I'm not saying they will be. I'm just saying I think they have that potential. Lagway, if you haven't watched the games where he was healthy and he was playing last year, it's everything that they said he was with the 5-star recruit. Like, truly everything that they said he was.
I watched the Ole Miss game. That was incredible.
He's amazing. I mean, he's amazing. Other riser is LSU. As much as people like to clown on him, Nuss was right there. Like, if he can just not turn the ball over, like, he's right there for, I think Drew Aller, and I know Big Ten fans get upset about this if they don't follow the NFL. I think Drew Aller is round 1, pick 1 in the NFL draft next year, just because I know what NFL scouts are really looking for and what they love. I think Klubnik is the other one that has an opportunity to be that. Nuss has an opportunity to do it too, if he has a really, really solid 2025. Everything's right there for LSU, and LSU is another one where we're in year 2 now of all the coaching changes that they made to try and fix that defense. I think Bo Davis is I'm biased because he was Texas's defensive line coach, but I think he's as good of a defensive line coach as anyone in the country. So I think they have truly the opportunity to be a riser. The one that it pains me to say, but I mean, you are in year 2 of Elko at A&M, so they should be. I mean, they were good this past year. They were good this past year. They're 8-4. They should be better this next year. I think Marcel Reed has a lot of talent.
Elko's a genius, so I trust him.
I trust him too. I truly trust him. And they are in the same breath as Oregon and Texas when it comes to finances and money and everything behind the team. Still haven't scored an offensive point against Texas in 12 years, but even though we played last year. But then on the question, I'll call it question mark / fall side. I think Vandy is a candidate to come back to earth a bit this next year. They got lucky a couple times, and then I'm on the Pavia, whatever you think about him, whatever. Those guys, if you don't have elite arm ability, you can come back to earth if you were winning other ways. And I don't think anyone would argue that Baldfather is an incredible thrower of the football. He wants to win. He's gritty. He gets them in 3rd and short situations, and then they're able to convert first downs. But what if they don't convert the first downs? I think they could come back to earth. And then I'll call this one more question mark that I would say coming back to earth, Alabama, right? I mean, like, would anyone be surprised if Alabama was 11-1 or 10-2 next year? No. Would anyone be surprised if, hey, we're in year 2 of this and it just isn't working and they're 7-5, 8-4, something like that? The state that I live in would implode, and the whole everything would shut down here. But Alabama could go. They're that question mark team, like a Michigan, like an Indiana, like a USC coming out of the Big Ten. That's the number one. Other faller ish. I don't know. Ole Miss, like, I don't think people realize how good that defensive line was for Ole Miss last year, and they're all gone. And the other one that I don't think people realize is how good Jackson Dart was in some of the throws that he was able to make, and that's all gone. We've done this now multiple years in a row where there's these teams that use the portal to just completely change over what they're doing. We saw how it worked for Florida State last year. Is Ole Miss? I'm not saying that they're going to go 2-10 or whatever, but could could they implode because the transfers just don't work out, and this year it kind of all comes apart. I don't know how good of a builder of a culture Kiffin is. I'm really I'm still questioning whether or not he builds a winning culture
Do
the
you
way
think
that
that
it needs to.
explained the up and downness of the team?
Yeah,
Like
I do. I do.
they punked Georgia. I mean, they
Exactly.
stuffed Georgia in a locker in a way that I don't know if anyone else could have. And then
No
you
one's done
lose
that
to
the past 5
Florida,
years.
lose to Kentucky. It's
Yep.
just it's jarring stuff.
Yep. Yep. So I think that was culture. I truly think that was culture.
Interesting.
Them having the losses that they had last year, where they didn't even look like the same team that was out on the field. Like that's culture. So I question that. And then, excuse me, South Carolina, man, like Lenora Sellers, year 2, like if he improves then on the deep ball and stuff like that, like he's dangerous and he's so tall and he's so big and he's so fast. And then how do they come back on defense? Because they didn't lose everyone on the defensive line. Dylan Stewart's coming back. Like they have. I loved their defensive line last year. I loved their team last year. Like they were the opposite, in my opinion, of Ole Miss, to where they had their culture got them wins when they were in those close games. I like Shane Beamer. The losing his mind during the bowl game was it's a little funny. Probably didn't need to do that, but then like they're a terrible call against LSU away from potentially being in the college football playoff last year, and that's in one of the top worst calls of the year on that. It was on the interception run back for a touchdown in a game where they were down to backup quarterbacks and backup players who the backup was hurt but still in there playing. So it's up in the air with them a little bit. But I think top to bottom, the SEC is just still a monster. I look at the conference coming in, and we're talking about the ones I think could fall off and be at the lower level. You're still talking about teams that are in the top 50 teams in college football.
Yeah, they're
the
top 50
4.
power rated, where the bottom of the Big Ten could be like Purdue, and you're not even top 100. It's just that bad.
Exactly. So I just think that the depth of the conference and all that stuff, which ultimately in the way that college football is being played now, could lead to an unexpected champion, especially the way injuries work. You don't know who ultimately is going to get in there. But I do think you have a lot of teams with a lot of talent and a lot of potential. And then you also have the national narrative when the SEC was dominating for so many years was a bit overblown, because it was essentially Alabama was dominating for so many years, and then you had an LSU fill in there, you had an Auburn fill in there, you had a Georgia fill in there when Alabama would have a down year, which was 10-2 or 11-1. The narrative now that the SEC has fallen off is also way overblown, and that stuff gets, if people don't if no one else lives in the South. If anyone watching your channel watches this video, you guys don't live in the South. For those who don't know, I live in Birmingham, Alabama. That stuff gets heard down here very, very loudly when the rest of the country starts talking about SEC demise or SEC going down, and it gets heard here down to the high school football level in terms of development to then put players in SEC schools and dominate and all that stuff. I think you'll see a little bit of a chip on a shoulder type attitude from some of the programs down here. It's great. The conference, I never understood it, because we went and played Ohio State last year in the Cotton Bowl, and I had all the Alabama fans around me telling all right, well, you got to go represent for the SEC. And I'm like, we've been at the conference for 1 year. What do you mean? How does us beating Ohio State have anything to do with how Alabama's doing? I've never really understood the conference, superiority and all that stuff that they do. They go crazy down
It's
here.
A religion. Football's a religion.
It is a religion down here for sure. So I think the demise of the SEC is a bit overblown, and I think you'll see a little bit of a punchback this year in 2025.
I'm curious to see how it all shakes out, because I think outside of Texas, I think it can go either way. I think the world of Georgia. I think Kirby Smart's still the best coach in football, but their schedule is still tough enough to where they can be the second or even best program in the conference and have 3 losses with all they lost.
Yep.
So
Yep.
that's something to pay attention to. Moving on to talk about some just teams, like team-specific stuff. First and foremost, I want to get your thoughts just on Michigan and Bryce Underwood. We already talked about it a little bit before, but just
Yep.
to run it back a little. What do you
Yep.
think Underwood's ceiling is? And you mentioned that, it's a bad marriage, but you also said it may not matter. Do you think he can carry Michigan to an elite level? Like, how high of a level can he carry them? Can he be what, Cam Newton or Trevor Lawrence was and just bring those teams to the mountaintop? Is a little bit lower than that. And then what can Michigan, changing the guard from their previous OC Kurt Campbell to Chip Lindsey, what can they do to best utilize his talent while, of course, still keeping the identity they want to keep?
Yeah. So ceiling is Heisman Trophy, national championship, first round pick of the NFL, and then Hall of Fame NFL career. That's the ceiling on Bryce Underwood. He's that good. If you haven't watched his tape, for those of you who like to watch tape, go look at it. It's phenomenal. The throws are all worldly. They're insane. The speed, it's amazing. And then he's quick too. He's athletic. Like it's wild. He's huge. He's big. You see it when he's on the field. But what I talked about there was the marriage, and that's why I say it may not matter. It may not matter, and I'm really curious to see what Michigan does, because talk about offensive coordinator change all you want. Sharon Moore has a system that he likes to run, and
Yes.
it is very different from what Underwood is used to and what utilizes his skill set. And they haven't recruited around Underwood. Like, Michigan isn't a wide receiver university. They don't recruit wide receivers at that level. They develop offensive line, tight end, and running back on their side, and they have gotten by with what they've needed to at the wide receiver and at the quarterback level outside of JJ. But even JJ had his limitations, right? Like, you weren't seeing JJ step back and make Peyton Manning type pocket
Yeah,
throws or Tom
Underwood is a
Brady type
higher
pocket
ceiling
throws.
than JJ. That's obvious.
Exactly. But if he isn't executing in the system the way that he needs to, if he doesn't take the 3-yard check down on 3rd and 3 because he wants to throw a 50-yard touchdown down the field, but his wide receiver doesn't have the go up and get it in a 50-50 type ball, the whole thing may not work. And so that's where the question mark comes in. What do they need to do in order to be successful? The first thing is they need to do is they need to give him some opportunity to showcase, or else they're going to lose him. The NIL deal being what it is, he's a competitor, and if he comes in and he's not having success in the system, and he feels like it's because, like, well, this isn't what I know I can be better, but this isn't allowing me to be as good, he will leave. He will transfer, no question, because ultimately he's costing himself money if he doesn't perform his best in college to become the number 1 overall pick in the NFL draft. So they need to give him easy throws. They need to give him some quick windows. They need to get him comfortable. All those, cliche things that you hear. But then they also need to, a few times a game, say, we're going to run play action, and we're going to let you throw a 40-yard deep bomb down the field and see if you can execute it. They need to mix then in what they ultimately want to do, which is establish the ground game with the ability to put the ball in his hands, whether it's on a rollout or so you establish the ground game and you do that, and then you have a play action or rollout to him, where then he has the ability to take it off and run, or throw the stretch play on the deep end, the middle route, or the check down, and trust that he'll make the correct decision. The problem is when you try to get all these things married together, you can end up with what Ohio State ended up with in the first half of the year last year, where it's just like just the most frustrating thing you've ever seen, and looks like nobody's on the same page with each other. But if you then ultimately run what you need to run, and you ultimately run at the strengths of your team, then you can be what Ohio State was in the second half of the year and just absolutely bludgeon everyone they played except for Texas. So it's going to be a true test of coaching at Michigan this next year to be able to marry Underwood and how they've recruited and developed on the offensive side up until this year. And that's where I question you and I talked about what we questioned more all year last year. So this is truly the test, because if it doesn't go well and he loses Underwood after all that
Oh my
momentum they
gosh.
had signing it,
Disaster.
Disaster. Can you imagine that fan base if they so because he's gone. I mean, they won't.
Yeah,
He won't
I'm
keep
a
it.
Michigan fan. If they do poorly and he loses Underwood, I'm out, because
Yeah, exactly.
it's unacceptable. And I think I don't think it'll be a disaster, but I also don't think he's going to win
I
him a
don't either.
national title or even a playoff game, because I think they do ultimately need those receivers, and I
Not this
think
year.
exactly.
I don't think he wins him a national title or a playoff game this year. But the ceiling of Underwood's time at Michigan is Heisman Trophy, national title, round one, pick one, and then Hall of Fame career in the NFL.
Yeah.
That's the ceiling
And when I was saying not win a playoff game, I meant like this season. I think
this
it's
season. Yeah.
too early offensively with the limitations they have at wide receiver. And there's really question, ironically enough, despite him being a freshman, based off of what I've heard, what many people have told me and what I've seen, he might be one of the more solid pieces on offense. And that
I
can be a
agree.
little bit scary with him being a true freshman, even though he's
I
phenomenal.
agree.
So
I could not agree more. Have you heard him speak?
no, I have not yet, but
He's in,
I've
he's in,
watched.
he's intelligent.
That's
He's
good.
intelligent. Yeah. He's everything that you want your quarterback to be. Like it was I was shocked, man, when he switched the
It's a
flip
big
field. I mean,
loss
I
for
know
LSU too.
it was huge. I mean, Baton Rouge was in shambles, but yeah, just it's so funny because, like I said, that's the ceiling, but the floor is he transfers to another team next year and Sharon Moore gets fired. That's the floor, which
Yeah,
is crazy. Yeah.
it is indeed very crazy, but it's something I'm very excited for. Michigan, I think, will be one of the biggest storylines, not just this year, but in the coming years, regardless of whether the ceiling or the floor is hit, based off of all of that and their recent success at the national level. Looking at Nebraska, we talked about Matt Rhule in year 3 and how, Temple take a big step forward, Baylor take a big step forward. The Carolina Panthers is a totally different game. Like,
Yeah.
I don't even want to look at that in relationship to how he succeeded
Yeah.
in college football. But also, there's the fact that he's playing in a tougher league than he did at Baylor or Temple. The
Mhm.
rules have changed. I looked at Nebraska's staff. They're one of the staffs I've done a deep dive on. Their continuity is non-existent, although I think they've made upgrades
Mhm.
consequentially. Like they had to relegate Satterfield and bring in Holgerson. I don't think Tony White and Matt Rhule were in agreement on everything, and I think that's why he left for Florida State. And also, Florida State spends money; they care about
Mhm.
football. What is your view on Matt Rhule with Nebraska? Not just this year, but long term. Like, let's say even if you want to think about it, like beyond Dylan Raiola. Like, what's your view of this program under Rhule? A proud blue blood that's been down, had
Mhm.
their first winning season in like literally ages. I think the last time they had a winning season, I was 13 years old. I'm
Yeah.
22 now.
Yeah.
So, what do you think?
Um, so I think the ceiling for them is to win the Big Ten this next year.
Oh,
That's
wow.
Yeah, I think that's the ceiling. I
That's pretty
truly,
incredible.
I think they could win the Big Ten. Um, I think Rayola needs to clean a lot of that shit up. If I'm gonna just be point blank about it, I think he needs to stop worrying about looking like Patrick Mahomes and needs to start worrying a little bit more about film and playing football and all those things. And I'm really surprised at some of the way he acts, given he's a coach's son. Truly am. But he's another one when you listen to him speak, like all the football IQ and everything like that. That's all there, and he has potential to be an NFL player as well. But like the difference in terms of, he was the number one overall quarterback recruit in the country, pocket passer style. Lagway was for. He's not even in the same breath as Underwood when it comes to the recruiting prospect coming in. Underwood's generational. The way Lawrence was, the way um, Vince Young was, the way Andrew Luck was, all that stuff. So I think that they have, at the absolute best, everything goes 100% correct. You could see them in Indy, and you could see them win the game in Indy. And that a lot has to do with trusting the culture that Rhule builds, because I am seeing it in Nebraska this past year, even in games where they didn't necessarily win or anything like that. And I know they got destroyed the week before Ohio State, but then you saw the game against Ohio State at how much they fought and how well they played. That's the opposite of what we talked about with Lane Kiffin and Ole Miss. Like, that culture is building
It was
there. And
Michigan-esque the way they played Ohio State, where they
exactly,
just let Ohio State make mistakes, but they stayed in, and even while
exactly.
making their own mistakes, they fought. They never caved. They played their A-plus game there, and it was huge. Rhule even mentioned it in the post-game press conference. It's like, this is the first time, I'm paraphrasing here, but like the first time I felt like we can play at like a championship caliber
hmm
or something
hmm
like that.
So they showed it, like, it's there. It all exists there. And the game against Colorado was a long time coming, man. That fan base needed something like that. But remember, that was when everyone was so high on them. And I think it was on your show the week after, and I told you, hey, everybody needs to kind of calm down. Like, they didn't score a offensive point in the second half, and they got that pick six. But like, they still had things that they need to work on. I trust Rhule to develop those things. So I do think you're going to see an improvement in this next year. Do I think they get to 9 wins? Potentially. Like I said, I think their ceiling is to ultimately win 11 games and go to Indy and win the Big Ten, because they have the prowess, they have the talent to do so, and they've developed. While they haven't had continuity on the staff, they've made the moves I think that they've needed to on the staff to ultimately get better. If it doesn't work out this year, then I think you see a little bit of what you just said of, well, is the Rhule formula essentially, is he great at elevating teams that aren't that great and in lesser competition and getting lesser recruited players to play up above their potential, but then when he has to do it at the ultimate SEC or a Big Ten level, hey, it just kind of falls apart, and that's more equivalent to, we're in big league now, just like you were in the NFL, and that stuff just didn't pan out and didn't work. Um, but everything is there for them. Everything is set up for them. They've got a lot of the, what I'd say, behind the scenes, people saying we need to be the old Nebraska and recruit this certain way, or people saying no, we got to adapt to the modern. They've taken care of that, and they're unified in terms
That's
of what they're
great.
doing on the back end, and that's extremely important. And so now it's the first, like, this is the season. Like, this is the season, and you really see, in my opinion, does Rhule have a culture that is sustainable for success for a decade to come? And you'll know a lot of that this year. Or does he potentially need to look in the mirror and make changes and adapt? Or ultimately, then, does Nebraska need to look in the mirror and make changes and adapt? Because even if he has a bad season this year, I don't think Nebraska would move on from him. I think they'd give him a year to try and correct it, as they should. As they should.
Yes.
Teams move on from coaches way too soon in this year, and he has shown you that he has that ability to move them in the right direction. So, my ultimate outlook for them is positive. I like them heading into this year. I need to see Raiola take that next step in maturity for them to ultimately reach their full potential, which is, like I said, they could win the Big Ten and then compete in the college football playoff. But I mean, that Nebraska fan base needs to be looking for 9 wins or more. They really need. That's really what they need to be looking for.
Yeah, that's kind of where I'm at. I long term like them. I do think that Rhule needs to, adapt and make some changes, but I think he did that a little bit after 6-6, and I think if needed, he'll do it again. I think their schedule also aligns with everything you said. I think the only game that is a for sure L is at Penn State in like late November. And, you said that's your preseason number one team. That's also my preseason number one team. And that's just going to be tough late in November in Happy Valley. But every other game is winnable. Like every other game. And you could probably have like a 2019 Baylor situation. They lose the biggest game, which is painful. But if you beat everyone else, especially with this expanded playoff, you're in a very good position. And you'd, probably not be a lifer, but you'd have a lot of faith from the fan base and everyone around you if you win, 10, 11 games with a program that hasn't since Frank Solich, like since the
Yeah.
year, I forget, when was the last time they won 11 games? I don't know. I mean, I was born in 2002. I think it was 2001. I think was the
They
last time
won
they won 11
10.
games.
They won 10 under Pelini, but the last time they won 11 was the year that they got blown out by Miami in the national championship.
2001. They
Yeah,
have not
yeah, that
won
one.
more than
Yeah,
10 games in that long. It's
yeah.
crazy. And I think they have
Mm-hmm.
a proud fan base. I think it's one of the best. I think it's the most engaged in college football because it's not
Yeah, for
like
sure.
it's not Ohio State size, it's not Michigan size, it's not, Bama,
Yeah.
Texas, Georgia size, but they're engaged. It's why they keep showing up to the games even
Mm-hmm.
though they've been through
So
it.
so loyal, so nice too, so welcoming to all the other teams that come in. College football is better when Nebraska's good. It's
Amen.
that simple.
I
Yeah.
agree with that. And I like where they're heading. I do have some questions about them, as I think everyone does and
Mm-hmm.
everyone should. I will say with Holgerson there and Raiola and the moves they made in the portal, I trust the offense way more than the
Mm-hmm.
defense going into
Mm-hmm.
next year.
That's fair. That's absolutely fair. Yeah, that's fair.
So moving on to Wisconsin. Wisconsin is a program like Nebraska who made a necessary coaching change in the same year, 2022. I
Yeah.
think both Nebraska and Wisconsin made good hires at the time. There's more of an optimism about Nebraska than Wisconsin, but I think that may be a little bit of a tainted view because Wisconsin's had tougher schedules, and I think, let me quickly calculate this in my head. Luke Fickell's record is 12-13 right now at Wisconsin.
Mm-hmm.
It's the exact same for Rhule. So,
Yeah, I think he is 12-13. Yeah.
like Fickell is he on the hot seat? One, and where do you think he is? Where do you think him and his program are heading? And also because I saw you made that reaction there. That's kind of my reaction when
Mm-hmm.
people say is Fickell on the hot seat? Should he be on the hot seat?
Yeah, so that's, and just like I said with like betting week to week, I try and not let my preseason influence my week to week picks. I was so high on the Fickell hire. Like I was like, this is one of the best hires ever. I can't believe Michigan State let him go and turned it down. I was like, this is just, he's just so high on Fickell when they hired him. I'm still high on Fickell even if it doesn't work out as Wisconsin, I'm still high on him in the next place that he goes as a head coach or defensive coordinator if he decides to try it in the NFL. He and them are a little bit opposite in that this year lines up for them the way that the year lines up for Nebraska. The schedule does not. So do I
Indeed.
think that then he should be on the hot seat? It depends on how they perform. It really depends on how the team. It depends on how they look. It depends on the culture. It depends on, are they 6-6, but they were 1-5 in one score games, or were they 7-5 and they were 1-4 in one score games, or hey, are they 7-5 and they're getting blown out by any good team they play and barely scraping by against mediocre or subpar competition, things like that. So really, I don't think you can answer the Fickell hot seat question because you need to see, is the culture setting in? And I have full confidence that it will. So I believe the culture will set in, and you're going to see an improved Wisconsin this year, and you're going to see them play a difficult schedule very, very tightly in their losses and get wins when you say, okay, that's what Wisconsin football looks like. So I'm high on Fickell. I'm high on Wisconsin. That doesn't necessarily mean that I think they can get it done this year because that schedule is it's really hard. It is a really tough
It
schedule
might be the
in terms
toughest
of
in the country, depending on
it
how it
could be.
plays out.
It potentially at the end of the year you could look back on that schedule and be like, man, that was like what Georgia had to go through in 24. Like it could play out really, really tough. Great for Wisconsin fan bases. They get all these great games to watch. That's as long as they win some of them. But I hope that the brass at Wisconsin takes that into account and they truly understand the culture of the team before they make a decision on Fickell at the end of this year if the year doesn't go the way it needs to from a record standpoint.
That's a very eloquent way of putting it, I think. I think 2026 is ultimately the put up or shut up year because the schedule
Yeah.
that year, I know it's way too early to predict, it should be easier.
It lines
And
up for him.
yeah, and then the recruiting classes pile on. They did a very good job in the portal too. They got Tanner. I don't know how you pronounce his last name. Is it Koisel or I don't know.
Yeah, so,
Tight end,
something like that.
tight end
Yeah.
from Ball State. Who he's tall. He has length. He had 800 receiving yards or something. It's someone who I think, if he translates to the Power Four, could be like one of the best tight ends in the country. Obviously, Billy Edwards was nothing special, but he was way better than Braden Locke, who started for a lot of their games. So the more I dug into them, because initially it's not that I was down on Fickell, but I was down on the team combined with the schedule. The more I've done my research and looked into it, they could be down, but they could also find some ways to maybe beat one good team, win all the games they should win, and be the best team Fickell has had. It's just that schedule's a gauntlet.
Exactly. I think the team lines up for him this year. The schedule lines up for him in 26. And obviously, in college football now, you can't even look at a roster and know what it's going to be the year after, because they could get guys back. People could apply for 100th year of eligibility. They could get a good transfer portal class in the off season. So you can't really look at that. But the team does line up for them in 25 with what they brought in from the portal and who they do have coming back, which are key returners. It's just that schedule's a gauntlet.
The roster fits what Grimes and Tressel want to do. Like
Yes.
Tressel, with what they brought in the portal, if things work out, he can probably finally run 4 down linemen. Like they won't have to go 3-3-5 or whatever cancerous stuff they were running, and that's why Alabama was able to just, pile them.
Slaughter them.
Yeah, and then on offense, with Billy Edwards and how big and tough he is, I mean, that's stereotypical Grimes power spread, especially with the O-line that they return. I'm in full agreement there. Moving on to Clemson. I want to talk about some teams that you're high on or can win it all. Why can the Clemson Tigers win it all in 2025? That's the question.
Yeah. So I'm going to talk about Clemson, and then I think this leads me into the overall national landscape, which I haven't. What's my what's my 5? Like who are my teams? So I'm going to preface this by saying I have Clemson preseason ranked number 2 now, and I had to talk myself into all this stuff.
Good
I think
for you.
that I have Penn State 1, I have Clemson 2, and then I have Texas and Ohio State after. I think Texas and Ohio State have higher ceilings than these teams, but I think Clemson has a higher ceiling than Penn State. And I think Cade Klubnik, and you remember this because you texted me after the Georgia Clemson game last year, and I was like, no, I still think Cade Klubnik's a good quarterback, because I was still bought into him. And ultimately that proved true as the year went on. He finally had a group of wide receivers that he can trust.
True freshman,
and they're going into year 2, and now he's going into year 3 of being with Garrett Riley in that system and in that scheme, and I trust that scheme. On the defensive side, they had the players. Clemson will have, if not one of the best defensive lines in the country last year. So can they finally marry the coaching staff now on defense after Venables left with the talent that they have on defense? If that happens, Clemson can win the national championship next year. No question about it. That team is very good. They have everything that you need on offense. And like I said, Cade Klubnik is one of the few people, along with Drew Aller, who is round 1, pick 1 potential in the NFL draft next year. He has the size, he has the arm talent, he could make every single throw. People forget he was the number 1 quarterback recruit in the country when he came to Clemson a couple of years ago, because things just didn't start off right. But now it's all clicking. He has that it factor. He has that swag. Texas wanted him. He's from Austin, Texas, and Texas wanted him really, really bad. So I followed him since dating back to his high school time. He's intelligent, and they can go as he goes this next year. You finally saw Dabo kind of come off of some of his principles and move in a little bit into the, I think I actually commend him this year that he did a good job adapting without losing who he is. It wasn't like they brought in 50 transfers or something like that.
But they got Will Help from Purdue, which is a nice addition for their defensive line.
Very nice addition for the D line. Have some questions for them on special teams. I have questions. I have questions for when we're talking about teams that can win a national championship. That's when I start to bring special teams in. Just like I have questions for Texas on special teams, right? Or what are we going to do at kicker? Is it going to be Stone or is it going to be Auburn? And if it is Auburn, like, did he mentally figure out whatever the hell that was? So it was bad. I have questions for Clemson on special teams too. So ultimately, could that be something where they have a team to win a national championship, but they didn't execute correctly on teams? But they're my preseason number 2. I have them as a higher ceiling than Penn State, as I have as my preseason number 1. I don't have them as high of a ceiling as Texas or Ohio State, but I think they're moving in the right direction. I think it all lines up for them this year, just like it all lines up for Penn State. The one question I have is, do they finally have the defensive coaching staff continuity, defensive coaching staff changes? Because it's those two good. They brought some people back and they brought in different coaches as well. That unlocks that defensive potential, because they should have the best 4-down defensive linemen in the country next year by far. They're all 4 of them are NFL draft day 1, day 2 guys in the following year or the following year after that when they're eligible to go.
Yeah, it's going to be exciting, and the benefit that Clemson has too is an ACC team who is elite will always win the war of attrition against an SEC or Big Ten team that's elite, because you're playing scrubs.
Exactly. They are going to come if they are what we're talking about. They are going to come to the college football playoff completely healthy, because unless barring a freak of like the war of attrition game in game out will not take place on them the way it would at Georgia this past year, the way it would at Texas, the way it would in Ohio State, at Penn State, all that stuff, because the ACC is just so bad everywhere else. I have no faith in Miami. I have no faith in Florida State. I think all those teams are going to be bad. I wasn't high on Miami coming into the season. I said they weren't going to have a defense. They didn't have a defense. Cam Ward's good, not great, and I think Beck will be good. I think Miami's going to be very similar to what they were this past year. They're going to score a lot of points. They're going to get shredded on the defensive side, and I think Florida State will be better. But how much? 2-10. Like, it was abysmal. And how much of a culture killing year was this past year? Like, that's it. We're going to really know a lot about Norvell this next year in terms of, did this past year completely kill his culture, or was it a one-off and he has the culture that can then bounce back? And you're going to know early on because they play Alabama. But I think, man, if they get through that ACC and they're as good as we're talking about with all that talent, they're going to be healthy. They're going to get a first-round bye in the college football playoff, because they still won't have that fixed by this next season. So that means they got to win 3 games to win a national championship. And maybe the bracket lines up for them the way that it lined up for Notre Dame this past year. And those games that they have to win go up against a team with a backup quarterback, an Indiana team that overachieved that probably shouldn't have necessarily been there. And then they have one real tough game against Penn State. They get past it, and then they're in the national championship. You never know. But then on the national landscape, right? Because I think that was the last topic we had, and you can definitely respond to Clemson, but just to kind of think about it, my top 5 that I have in this next year is I have Penn State 1, I have Clemson 2. I've went back and forth on this one, but ultimately I have Texas 3 and Ohio State 4, just because of Arch versus Sayan and the simple factor that we've seen Arch. Like, we know what he is. We haven't seen Sayan after that. And then 5 is where I think it gets really, really interesting. But I'm putting Oregon there. And I know a lot of people have Notre Dame in that spot and in that top 5, but I am going to give it to Oregon with a little bit. I trust Lanning and I trust the development that they've had there. And like I said, they've been so close. And then that team outside my top 5 that I really think has top end ceiling potential is Georgia. And I don't know how anyone could
exactly.
I totally understand people not having Georgia in their top 5. I don't have them in my top 5 either. But if you think they can't win the national championship, you're kidding yourself.
Yeah, you're insane. Exactly. For Clemson, I don't know how high I would put their ceiling. I'd have to think about it more. We'll talk about this in a few seconds, minutes. I think Penn State has a boosted ceiling than what people would typically think because of how good their staff is. Like, they could probably do what... It'll have to depend on Franklin a lot, but with the OC-DC combo they have and some of their position coaches, I think they can pull what Michigan did under Harbaugh and punch insanely above their weight class to where it's like they're not top 10 team talent composite, but they play like it, so they may as well be. But that's, of course, to be seen because Franklin has had that before, and it hasn't gone anywhere. As for Clemson, I think what you mentioned is the marriage between the staff and the players on defense. I think that's a perfect summation of what the question is, because they have talent, much like Allen did at Penn State, but you saw those moments where, things just didn't fit, or they were near elite, but they weren't elite. And it's not like Allen walking into Penn State where Manny Diaz left him in a top 5, top 10 situation. Clemson has that talent, but under Wes Goodwin, they've never really been at that elite level. That's been the case for years now because Venables has been at Oklahoma for 3 years. So that's interesting. I love Matt Luke on the O-line and the coaching job that he does. I love their receivers. I think Klubnik's amazing. And I think because of how Riley runs the system and the O-line they have, I think the run game will take care of itself. I think you could probably put almost anyone at running back, and they'll have like a decent rushing offense. I want to talk in particular about Ohio State and then Penn State, and then we'll get out of here. So for Ohio State, I asked, can they repeat? And I think the obvious answer to that is yes. But what should their fans expect in 2025? Like a bare minimum? You can even bring up the Michigan game. And how high is this team's ceiling?
What should they expect, or what do they expect? They expect them to go undefeated, beat Michigan by 100 points, and win the national title. That's what they do expect. What should they expect? They should expect 10 wins at minimum, just like they got this past year. They should expect them to finally beat Michigan, because that's the one thing that was missing from the title run. And it almost works out to their advantage coming into this next year, because you still have that motivation factor, right, in the offseason. They can say, forget about the national championship and just plaster a banner of the Michigan scores for the past 4 years in the weight room, in the practice facility, and make sure that everyone's clicking at all cylinders and working as hard as they can towards it. They should expect a minimum of 10 wins. They should expect to be in the college football playoff. They should expect to be competing for a national championship. They should expect to get to the semifinal, in my opinion, at minimum, and then be right there in order to get it done. Like I said, what do they expect? They expect to win. They expect to win it all, which I understand. I get it. A lot was made of the $20 million roster last year, when it was, just so people understand, most good teams are spending $20 million on their roster right now. And just like the NBA and NFL salary cap did over the past 20 years from now, $20 million is going to be like what Northwestern spends on their roster. It's going to look like nothing for what an Ohio State, a Texas, and A&M has to spend on their roster in order to compete. It's only going to go up as these TV deals keep increasing and more people keep coming and watching the sport. So, but back to the question on Ohio State, I mean, at minimum, they should win 10 games, and they should be right there to compete for a national championship. And the Ohio State fan base should expect that they beat Michigan this year.
I think that's pretty reasonable. You mentioned that they can win it all. I completely agree. I'm really high on Sayin. I think he's going to be a first team or second team All Big Ten QB. And that's with a quarterback room that adds a lot of talent. Like, you bring in Bryce Underwood, you have Dante Moore, who's been developed, you have Drew Aller coming back, and then like Dylan Raiola, can he take a big step forward? What do you think the team's floor is? Is there, because last year, I mean, that was one of the best, if not it wasn't better than 2019, but it was one of the best Ryan Day teams. And yet there's a world where, if something happens against Nebraska, in addition to Oregon and Michigan, they lose 3 games. Like, they flirted with some weird losses. Is there a shot they lose 3 games? Or do you think just with how elite of a coach Day is and with the talent they have that they're kind of guaranteed to win 10 games?
So I'll put it this way. Say, I'm going to start on the positive side. Say you come in and the offensive line is elite from day one, and all the questions that were like, holy shit, and say Sayan is elite from day one, and he doesn't. It's like, oh, he looks like he's a junior out there. So I mean, at that point, we're all expecting him to go 12-0 and win the national championship. I'll put it the other way. Say you come in and the offensive line is like, oh, whoa, and Sayan's like, okay, he's a bit of a freshman, threw 2 picks against Texas or something like that. They lose it, then yeah, absolutely, they could lose 3 games. Because if that happens, then they've already lost the first game, most likely, right? They probably already lost to Texas. And then at that point, could they lose to Oregon? Could they lose to Penn State? Could they lose and drop one of them somewhere along the way? Could they go to Ann Arbor and, God forbid, get beat by Michigan? I mean, yeah, we just talked about the ceiling that Underwood has, right? So absolutely, I would say the floor is losing 3 games. Do I think it's going to happen? No, I don't. I just don't. I think at minimum they'll go 10-2.
That's kind of where I'm at too.
Yeah.
Even with all they lose, even with Penn State and Michigan getting better and Texas still staying at that level, they get 2 of those games at home, and they're just that talented and that well coached. And I like Day. I've been a Day defender forever.
Yeah. Both of us have. I love Day. I think he's in the top 2 head coaches in college football. I thought that. Yeah. It's like I said, I think since post-COVID, the number 1 program in the country has been Ohio State. And that includes Georgia. I just think that Ohio State played, when we had divisions, Ohio State played in the tougher division of the Big Ten, and Georgia played in the easier division of the SEC. And it had a lot to do with how things ended up working out.
I agree with that 100%. I think, if you just make 1 kick against Georgia, everyone would be talking about Day being the best head coach in the country. Indeed. And then last but not least, why do you think Penn State can win it all? And what are some non-negotiables that they present to other teams? Because we all know that Franklin hasn't gotten it done, but it seems like the stars have aligned, and he has made some of the most impressive staff moves and upgrades that I've seen in a long time.
Yeah, so start with the first one. I think the offensive-defensive coordinator combo for Ohio State last year was the number 1 in the country, and a lot of that doesn't mean I think Chip Kelly was the number 1 offensive coordinator in the country. I think the combo and a lot of that has to do with how high I have Knowles. I think the offensive defensive coordinator combo for Penn State is better than Ohio State's was last year.
Agreed.
I think they are. I don't even think you can. It's the one debate that I probably wouldn't be willing to have with someone that someone thinks that another team has a better offensive defensive coordinator combo than Penn State. At that point, I just kind of be like, well, you must not follow the sport as well.
I think Kotelnicki's number 1 OC, and then Knowles is easily number 1 DC.
If you take out head coaches who are de facto coordinators, so if I take out Lincoln Riley and Steve Sarkisian, I agree with you that Kotelnicki's probably the number 1 OC in the country. You have Denbrock. You have a few that it's an argument. I'm not saying that one. That one is not a non-debate. That no one's going to call you a clown for having Kotelnicki at number 1, right? I think there is no debate that Knowles is number 1. We talked about that. So I think they have the, without a doubt, the number 1 DC and arguably the number 1, without a doubt, top 3 offensive coordinator. So that's the first reason they can win it all. The second reason is they have the talent. In all these years that we've been previously talking, they've never had a quarterback who even had potential at round 1, pick 1. And you have the guy who most NFL rooms are considering is most likely our round 1, pick 1 next year in Aller. And I think that they have they're also very close. I don't say that they're right there the way Texas and Oregon are, because they haven't really won a big game. They still haven't really done that. And Oregon smacked them in the mouth in Indy. So I don't think they're right there, but they have been very, very close. And if they can get a wide receiver in the spring window, add a little bit more depth in that room, everything is right there. And they followed the formula, right? They followed the formula that Michigan followed in 23, that Ohio State followed in 24. They got all the key contributors who are upperclassmen back. They got them to come back, and they're just going to be. They're just going to be good. They're going to be good. They're nasty on defense. They're fast on offense. They can run the ball. Aller can make every single throw. So if they can answer that question at wide receiver, which I'm giving them the benefit of the doubt that they can, I probably shouldn't because they haven't been able to answer the question of wide receiver for so long. But that can give them what they need to get over that hump and win the national title. The one I do question whether or not they have a mental problem against Ohio State, and that is just that they get on the field and subconsciously they think they're going to lose. I do
You saw
question
that in the home game this year where the players were way too emotional. They eventually cooled down, but by then any advantage they had was gone, and it came down to roster v. roster, and they just weren't going to win that.
Yeah, exactly. But I mean, it's all there, man. It's all there. I'll say it this way: if they underperform this year, you finally, as a Penn State brass, have to consider from moving on from Franklin. You finally do,
because they have the best OC-DC combo I think that I've seen in years. I think you have to go back to, and it might even be better than this. Like, I'm talking Lanning, Todd Monken, where Monken is like basically responsible. You have to give Kirby credit, of course, but he is, I think, the biggest reason why they won those 2 titles was how he managed that entire system and turned a Stetson Bennett-led offense into one of the most explosive, dangerous, consistent units in the country. And then if there's anyone who can, like get close to Kyle Flood when it comes to the O-line, it's how Trautwein has developed and recruited at Penn State. I mean, they're bringing in 5 stars. They finally, James Franklin before Olu Fashanu didn't have a first-team All-Big Ten offensive lineman or a first-round offensive line pick ever. He got one, and now they have a ton of 5 stars and 4 stars on that line. And more importantly, they've developed them to be that good, especially in run blocking.
Strength and conditioning's been really positive for Penn State. And whereas I don't think they've necessarily gone away from smaller size but speed on the defensive side, they definitely have gotten the size that they need on the offensive line, for sure.
And on defense, they have, like last year, I think they had 3 or 4 300-plus pound D tackles.
Finally, they're not at like where they're rotating guys out like 8 deep that are 300-plus, like some of the other programs, but they're getting them on the roster. Like they're getting the size where it needs to be.
Yes, and I think we talked about this pre-show. What they like to do on defense with getting to the QB, putting everyone behind the 8 ball and forcing turnovers. Who did that at Oklahoma State, and who did that at Ohio State? Jim Knowles.
Exactly.
Like it perfectly fits.
It matches. I don't want to get everyone. I don't want to get everyone too excited. Who is a Penn State fan, because they still do have James Franklin, and it is still got to win a big game, but they should be more confident than they've ever been before, if not just for the fact that Knowles is there, and also the other side of it. The only defense that Kotelnicki couldn't solve was Knowles, and now he doesn't have to solve it anymore. So I mean, that's a big point.
He can learn from it.
He can learn from it, and he can ask him, "Hey, how did you attack me? Like, what did you do? That's like, tell me what you saw and what I do." And you were like, "I can slow this offense down by doing this," and that talking happens. And
he's in year 2. He's in like Bo Davis at LSU. He's in year 2.
Exactly. He's in year 2. So that's why they're my preseason number 1. That's why I think they ultimately can win it all.
Agreed. Well, thank you very much for coming on. I really appreciate it. Always love talking college football with you. Again, everyone, make sure to check out Baldfather Bets on YouTube. Search it up, give him a subscription, hit his notification bell, and also like this video, comment any final thoughts you have down below, hit our notification bell, and we will see you all very soon. Thank you so much to my Patreon members for sponsoring this channel. Thanks to Crash2488, Brasco Rascal, and kind of Little OH for being Heisman members. Thanks to Chris Lane, Ismar, and Tyler Nye for being All-American members. Thanks to John Lynn, Roaming Gnome, Matthew Sale, Austin Christmas, Joshua Jorgensen, and Will Loftus for being all-conference members. Make sure to check out my merchandise store, Patreon page, and Discord server via the links in the description or down below in the pinned comment. Thank you all for watching, and I will see you all very soon.